I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the send button for the third time. I texted the family group chat. Surgery's coming up. Just need someone there when I wake up. The words felt heavier than I imagined, as if they carried all the fear, the pride, and the quiet loneliness I had been carrying for years. My apartment was unnervingly silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside my window. Sunlight hit the edge of my silk blouse just right, making me feel both fragile and absurdly polished. I had spent years building this life. The career, the apartment, the carefully curated independence, and yet, here I was, reduced to hoping someone from the family I had learned to navigate without would show up. The phone buzzed. Not a reply, just a reminder that time was ticking. My heart quickened, my chest tightening with that old, familiar anxiety. What if they didn't come? What if I woke up alone under sterile hospital lights, just me and the echo of my own heartbeat? I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. The soft rustle of the curtains felt like a whisper, a small comfort. And yet, I couldn't shake the thought that this moment might expose everything I had been hiding, my vulnerabilities, my need for connection, the very fact that sometimes I wasn't the invincible woman everyone assumed I was. I remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it was 10 years ago. I was 22, just out of college, and terrified of being ordinary. But that night, my fear wasn't about failure in my career. It was about being invisible to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. My mother had barely looked up from her wine glass when I told her I had been accepted to a scholarship program in New York. "That's nice, honey," she said, her tone flat, almost dismissive. My father didn't even glance at me. He was too busy arguing with my older brother about something trivial, as if my accomplishments were background noise. I felt my chest tighten, a familiar sting of disappointment rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand recognition, but instead, my hands shook in my lap, clutching the small notebook my grandmother had given me years earlier. "Remember," she had whispered once, brushing my hair from my face, "the world will try to ignore you. Keep your power quietly close. One day, it will speak for itself." That notebook had become my talisman. Its pages were filled with dreams, plans, and sketches of a life I would create far away from judgment and dismissal. I had learned to retreat into its lines whenever the sting of neglect became too much. That night, I packed my things and left before dawn, carrying only what I could manage and the notebook that smelled faintly of lavender and hope. The ride to the train station was quiet, the city streets blurred past like a watercolor painting. I felt the lump in my throat tighten with every mile, but underneath it, there was a spark, a stubborn determination that refused to die. By the time I arrived in New York, I had made a decision. I would succeed on my own terms. I wouldn't wait for approval, and I wouldn't beg for validation. The world might not see me yet, but I would make sure that one day, my presence could not be ignored. That promise, that quiet fire in my chest, became the engine driving me through sleepless nights, self-doubt, and the countless doors slammed in my face. It was a lonely beginning, but it was mine, and in that solitude, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. New York was nothing like I had imagined. The city pulsed with energy, ambition, and chaos, each street corner a challenge and an opportunity all at once. I moved into a tiny studio apartment with a creaky floorboard and a view of the fire escape, but to me, it felt like the first page of a brand new story. I kept the notebook my grandmother gave me on the small kitchen counter, its edges worn, the pages curled from constant use. It was my guide, my witness, and my secret confidant. The early days were brutal. I worked long shifts at a local design firm, answering phone calls, running errands, and taking notes that no one ever read. At night, I studied, sketched, wrote, and taught myself every skill I didn't learn in school. Every no from a client or supervisor felt like a weight pressing down, but I reminded myself of the promise I had whispered to myself in the train station years ago. One day, they won't be able to ignore me. Then I met Claire. She was a senior architect, brilliant, discerning, and kind. When she noticed my portfolio tucked under my desk one late evening, she asked me to show her my work. I expected a polite nod at best, but instead, she said, "You have talent. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Let me help you." That moment changed everything. Under her guidance, I learned the real intricacies of the industry, how to pitch, negotiate, and turn raw ideas into something tangible. There were nights I cried on the fire escape, listening to the city hum beneath me, convinced I wasn't enough. But then there were mornings when I nailed a presentation, received a small but meaningful bonus, or watched a client's face light up at my designs. Those victories were tiny at first, but they accumulated, stacking like bricks in the foundation of the life I was quietly building. I started taking freelance clients on the side, deliberately keeping them hidden from my family. They believed I was still finding my way, but each signed contract, each completed project, each positive review quietly proved I was not only surviving but thriving. Within a few years, I had a reputation for precision, creativity, and reliability, though my family remained unaware. I decorated my little apartment with things that matter to me: framed sketches, plants I named after inspiring women, and the notebook that had guided me through loneliness and doubt. Every night before bed, I'd trace its edges, remembering my grandmother's words. The fire in my chest had grown into a steady flame, warming me through exhaustion and setbacks alike. The city had tested me, but it had also given me a gift: independence. I wasn't just surviving. I was carving a space where I could excel without compromise. I learned the satisfaction of quiet victories and the subtle thrill of knowing my own strength before anyone else could witness it. And all the while, I kept one thought at the forefront: the family who once dismissed me would one day see the woman I had become, but on my terms. The day my family finally arrived, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm. They had expected to see me nervous, perhaps frail, needing comfort after surgery. Instead, I was waiting in my sunlit apartment, everything arranged with quiet elegance, a subtle reflection of my life built away from their scrutiny. My living room smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar, the light catching the polished edges of my desk and the framed sketches I had once hidden in my closet. When the door opened, I heard the familiar shuffle of my parents' shoes and the hesitant, almost nervous laughter of my brother. I greeted them with a warm smile, the kind that could disarm even the most skeptical observer. I ushered them in and they paused, eyes widening as they took in the space. This is your apartment?" my mother asked, her voice faltering. She always had been quick with words when praising someone else, but today, hers faltered in surprise. I offered them coffee, a small gesture of normalcy. The way they looked around was almost comical in its disbelief. Every plant, every book, every sketch frame spoke volumes of the life I had quietly built. They had expected vulnerability. They were met with composed, unapologetic strength. Then I finally spoke. "You've seen me as dependent, fragile, someone who couldn't manage without your presence," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "The truth is, I've been managing. I've been building a life I'm proud of, one that doesn't rely on anyone's approval." My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hand hovered over her mouth, caught between guilt and awe. My brother's usual smirk had vanished, replaced with a wide-eyed, incredulous expression. I gestured toward my desk. "This," I said, indicating the neatly stacked contracts, the open laptop with client emails, and the framed designs on the wall, represents years of work, late nights, and silent victories. I've launched my own design firm, secured high-profile clients, and made decisions you never bothered to ask about, let alone support. They exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and shame washing over their faces. We didn't know," my mother whispered, finally breaking the silence. I nodded. "You didn't. But that was never my barrier. It was yours." I didn't need permission or recognition to succeed. I needed belief in myself, and thankfully, I had people who saw my potential when you didn't. I could see it now, the realization dawning that the girl they once ignored had become a woman they could no longer underestimate. Silence settled for a moment, heavy but electric, charged with the weight of truth. I allowed them to process it, watching their expressions flicker through astonishment, guilt, and, finally, a hesitant admiration. I wasn't angry. I was deliberate. I wanted this revelation to land fully, to give them a moment to reflect on how their dismissal had shaped me into someone who could thrive independently. Finally, I let a soft smile curve my lips. I wanted you here today not just for the surgery, but so you could witness the person I've become. Someone who doesn't need to be saved, someone who can stand on her own. And yet, I still value family. When the effort is mutual, the respect is earned, and the love is authentic. Their faces softened slightly, understanding at last that I had grown not out of spite, but from necessity. The power balance had shifted quietly but irrevocably, and I was the one holding the compass now, guiding how this family could fit into my life, on my terms, with integrity, and with acknowledgement of the woman I had become. The realization that I held the upper hand settled over me like warm sunlight. For years, they had assumed I needed their guidance, their approval, their presence. Today, the tables had turned. I could decide how, or if, they fit into my life moving forward, and I intended to do so with both compassion and clarity. I poured another round of coffee, the aroma filling the apartment, and watched them settle uneasily on the couch. My father fidgeted with the edge of his sleeve, my mother clasped her hands tightly, and my brother avoided my gaze altogether. I took a deep breath and began to outline the conditions under which they could be part of my life, not as the authority figures they once were, but as equals who respected boundaries and growth. First, I said, my voice steady, there needs to be honesty. I can no longer tolerate dismissals, half-truths, or minimizing what I've accomplished. We all have past grievances, but they don't get to dictate my future. I watched my mother nod slowly, the weight of my words sinking in. Second, I continued, I want to see genuine effort toward change. My brother, that means leaving behind the cynicism that undermines others and focusing on the goals you claim to want. My parents, it means learning to listen before you speak, to acknowledge instead of dismiss, and to respect my independence without interference. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Each condition wasn't punishment. It was an invitation for them to grow alongside me. I had spent too many years navigating life alone, and now I was extending a hand, but only to those willing to meet me halfway. And third, I added, softer this time, there must be accountability. We are all human. We make mistakes. But growth requires owning them, apologizing when necessary, and taking steps to be better. I can support you in this, but I will not be complicit in toxic cycles. This is non-negotiable. My father's eyes glistened slightly. My mother's lips trembled, perhaps with regret, perhaps with relief. My brother finally met my gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between us. They could choose to walk this path with me, or they could step aside. The power had shifted, but it was not cruelty. It was a recognition of reality, earned through years of resilience, courage, and silent victories. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the surge of control mingled with compassion. I wasn't severing ties. I was redefining them. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about balance, respect, and emotional honesty. I had been weak once, not by nature, but by circumstance, and I refused to let that version of myself dictate my future. By the time the conversation ended, there was a quiet energy in the room, tentative but hopeful. They had glimpsed the woman I had become, and now they had a choice: grow, adapt, and engage as equals, or accept the distance their past actions had created. The decision was theirs, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I sipped my coffee, savoring the warmth. Power was no longer something I feared. It was something I wielded deliberately, gracefully, and with unwavering self-respect. And for the first time, I knew that boundaries could coexist with love, strength could coexist with empathy, and independence could coexist with connection. In the weeks after that day, I watched the changes unfold, not instantaneously, but in subtle, meaningful ways. My family began showing up differently. My brother started pursuing a project he had abandoned years ago, and he actually asked for advice instead of offering excuses. My parents were learning to listen, to acknowledge my efforts without judgment, and to celebrate milestones without the old shadow of dismissal. I noticed these small shifts during ordinary moments: My mother leaving a supportive note on my desk before I left for a client meeting, my father calling not to control but to genuinely check in, my brother sharing a completed design idea he was proud of. Each gesture, however minor, felt monumental. I had set the conditions, and they were meeting them, on their own terms, through their own effort. Sitting in my apartment one quiet evening, I reached for the worn notebook my grandmother had given me. Its pages were filled with sketches, dreams, and reminders of a younger me, trembling with uncertainty and hunger for validation. I traced the familiar lavender scent, inhaling deeply, feeling the connection between past and present. That small gift had guided me through every doubt, every lonely night, every setback. Now, it also symbolized the full arc of my journey, the strength I had cultivated, the independence I had claimed, and the life I had built quietly but deliberately. I reflected on how far I had come. The fear, the pain, the moments of self-doubt, they had all been necessary, shaping the woman I was now. I had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that asking for help did not diminish strength, and that true growth required both courage and patience. Looking around my apartment, I saw reminders of this journey everywhere, framed sketches that marked the beginning of my career, plants I had nurtured from seedlings into thriving green life, and the sunlight spilling across the polished floorboards, warming the space I had claimed. And in that quiet, luminous moment, I realized something profound. I could be loved, respected, and connected without compromising who I was. My journey had not been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about proving to myself that I could rise, endure, and flourish on my own terms. I smiled, softly, confidently, knowing the truth in my bones. I had grown, I had conquered, and I had defined the boundaries that allowed love and strength to coexist. And as I whispered to the empty room, a final voiceover thought settled into place. I am strong. I am independent. And I am enough, always, unapologetically, and with grace.